it's 8:30. I'll call this morning's meeting to order. We'll move into the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
We have a motion to approve.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Moving into citizens to be heard, is there anyone that'd like to speak on anything not on the agenda? Ms. Burnett, would you like to speak?
Sure would.
All right, come on up. Good morning.
Good morning.
What can we do for you?
Well, I just want to know what Kent found out about the review of the septic system that was not inspected by Dewey, which was claimed that he did, but he did not inspect that system.
I think we provided you with the final review of that report 2 weeks ago.
Well, no, I talked with Kent outside after the meeting, and he was going to check in. It was not inspected.
Well, we like I said, we furnished you with the final report. If Ken said he'd look into something further, we've not had that, but I think our administrator, Mr. Berg, would follow up on that for you.
Okay.
I can certainly check.
All right. Then on the, I think Jenny, you were involved with Tim to write this letter to the, I don't want to use names, but the people on the hill that created all this, you know, I mean, this place is a treasure trove of violations that, you know, the county could actually use as a training course out there for what not to do. Has anything come of this list of shoreline violations? Because,
Can you tell me the dates of the letter? There was quite a few letters, so I don't know what.
well, this was September 28th, 2017.
Okay.
And it wasn't completed by October 31st, 2017. The county was going to administrate penalties.
Sure.
Has that happened, or?
The watershed has submitted
The watershed-
verification that all those were resolved.
I talked with Bruce about a month ago. He was 2 months ago at our home, and he knew nothing about this letter at that time.
You know, I don't believe that to be the case because we had a meeting, we had a few people there, and that was the course that we were going to take with that. So I think he was aware, and whether it came from the watershed or from their engineer, we received the verification that those had been completed as per the letter.
Well, you got a 140-foot, 150-foot slope coming down into our neighborhood. That's probably got a 50-foot elevation. You feel this is safe?
Yeah, that's not my expertise, but the people that would know about those kind of things have said that it's okay. So,
Well, anything over 18 feet in shoreline areas has to be done by a registered professional civil engineer.
Well, I think that's why the watershed weighed in on that, is because they do have that on staff. So from your perspective, you're talking about the new issue was this letter that was sent this fall. Jenny's saying that the watershed has signed off on all those potential violations. You can shake your head, but that's we can provide you with the documentation that the watershed has signed off on that. But I mean, that's all we can do from this point.
Well, how
on.
could they sign off on it if they never got any permits?
You can talk to the watershed about that. I mean, you can, if they signed off on it, you can talk to the watershed about that.
Okay. Then I got a few more. You got, you know, under your priority of concerns throughout, I'm not sure who wrote these up, that get sent to the state. What permitting process does the county use if they do not use stormwater prevention law?
I don't know what that letter is. I mean, I don't know if that's a statewide circulated letter, if it's a county specific. I don't see a county letterhead on it. I'm not sure.
Well, then I'd like to just bring up one more point. Well,
Okay.
On the grants, if you go into, I'll have you look it up. that money's all diversified into the schedule of intergovernmental revenue. And those, 30, 40, 50, 80 million dollars that you say the county is not receiving.
Those are statewide funds.
Well, look up 2016, 2015, 14. Those millions are in here. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have Lori's office look into that. Anyone else wishing to speak on anything not on the agenda? If not, we'll move into the approval of payment of bills and vouchers.
Move approval.
We have a motion to approve as presented.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Approval of the minutes from the February 20th, 2018 board meeting.
Move approval.
We have a motion to approve
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Our 8:35 item, Mr. Rosenberger, request for approval of amendment to the joint powers agreement with Prairie Lakes. Good morning.
Members of the board, good to see you. I was at death's door last week. It was very, very touch and go. I missed a couple days of work, which never happens, so I'm glad to be back with you here. What you have before you today is a request for an approval of a resolution from Prairie Lakes. And essentially, it's pretty redundant. We already are very married to Prairie Lakes. We're a big part of it. We own 15% of the assets, and we also own 15% of the liabilities. What we're in the process, Prairie Lakes is in the process of doing is to replace a superheater that's been a problem since day one. We had several, and when I say we, I'm talking about Prairie Lakes, so just understand that. We had serious problems with the superheater replacing tubes on a regular basis, and it got to be a really, really significant expense. We had litigation with the original contractor on a couple of occasions, and we prevailed on a couple of occasions, and we had some monetary gain as a result of that. What has been decided to do is to replace the superheaters with an evaporator, and essentially what an evaporator is it doesn't heat the steam up as high. It's just a different way to manage the steam than the superheater. It's thought with the with the evaporator that it should increase the steam protection by 10 to 15%, which is good for the final end users. And overall, it's going to be a good fix because we won't have to replace the superheater tubes about every other month. The reason we're doing the bonding, we're going to bond for $1.1 million. That's basically the cost of the repairs. And there isn't enough money in the operating fund to pay for that on an initial annual basis. So Ottertail County has decided to bond for it on behalf of Prairie Lakes on a 10-year period, and the bond will be repaid through the use of the annual budget. So I stand ready to answer any questions. I did have Jenny look at the resolution that's before you, and I don't think you have any issues.
No.
And Kevin, you may want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, well, the work that's being scheduled to be done is long overdue to improve that system and correct the faulty original construction that resulted in the lawsuit that you talked about. But I agree this is redundant. We are already on the hook as a county for any obligations. The important thing here is this is not a request for a cash call for 15% of the 1.1 million. The intent is for that to fall in line and be part of the operating budget. The principal and interest payments will be incorporated into the annual budgets. So, you know, which we had intended and planned for to begin with. So I find this redundant, but apparently their bond counsel felt more comfortable having a separate resolution for it, which is fine.
Madam Chair, just, I was talking to Jenny about that yesterday, and she also agreed that at times lawyers can be challenging as well. So if a lawyer acknowledges that, then so be it.
I'll make the motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. This doesn't have a resolution number on it.
Let's see, Clay County.
Well, this is an amendment. I don't know.
I think it'll be executed and attached to the original agreement.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we do have a motion.
Hey, was there a second yet?
I'll second.
Huh?
I'll second.
And Mr. Gross seconds. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I was just, when you say it's part of the annual budget, do we anticipate the 165? It's gonna be about 160,000 something like that, isn't it?
Well,
And that's part of the.
yeah,
budget?
Frank, the total, our total share, if we were to each have to pay it separately, ours would be about $165,000. But the idea behind this is it's going to be either a 5 or a 10-year bond. And so rather than pay it all up front, we'll pay the bonds back. And so the annual principal and interest payment will be incorporated into Prairie Lake Solid Waste budget,
Okay.
of which then we will try to have that paid for by the revenues that are collected for Prairie Lake Solid Waste, meaning the tipping fees and the collection of recyclables and those types of things.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? If not, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
All right, we'll move into our number 3 item, the FM diversion update. We have Bob Zimmerman from the City of Moorhead, Mayor Williams, Rocky Schneider. Good morning. You guys coordinate quite well today.
Look at that, they're all color coordinated here.
We are?
You guys know how we get into this?
Brian would. Brian, can you help with the computer?
I'll get Mark.
Better than I.
I'll get my grandkids, so
Mark was in, he said it was all ready, so.
Short presentation.
Thank you.
Let's bring another chair up for John, too.
I got it,
All right.
We got a chair up here for you, John.
Yep, John, there's a chair for you already. Good morning.
Comfy one.
Who's kicking it off? Rocky?
I can kick it off. So, just to explain what we handed out, there's a press release that the Diversion Authority sent out last Friday. Went out to sort of everybody at the same time. The goal is to try to get the information out there equally to all parties at the same time. What it sort of announces is the Diversion Authority intends to submit a new Minnesota permit, and we think we're at the time and place now where we're ready to do that. And so the presentation today is really to run through a lot of the process, what's happened since the permit denial previously, since the governor's task force, and ultimately what's included in the new permit application.
And just to clarify quickly, I've had some questions from people. Your plan is to now bring this to, I know you have a large scale of public meetings coming up, so you're not looking for any action today. You're just information purposes only as you continue to circulate this plan, correct?
Correct, and the Diversion Authority meets on Friday at 1 o'clock for a special board meeting, and I think the goal of that meeting would be to have the technical team present their application for approval.
Thank you.
So again, why we're here is to talk through this new permit application, what it entails, and what process we got to this point. So why did the project change? You're obviously pretty familiar with this, but it goes back to the lawsuit filed about 5 years ago now, and the injunction that went into place last September. And at that time, the Chief Justice, Judge Thunheim, said it's time for all parties to work together to find common ground. And I think there was a good renewed effort and a lot of helpful processes that went through after that to kind of bring everybody back to the table. I think the need for the project is sort of undeniable, but the details of the project are always the difficult one, thing to get along with, right? So in September, Governor Dayton and Governor Burgum, you know, I'm repeating this, I know a lot of you know all this, but for the sake of the public, both governors really led this task force, 16 members. They met 5 times. The governors gave a great commitment to this project process and to move it forward. In addition to that task force, there was also a technical group that was formed that included Bob Zimmerman, and ultimately was expanded to include an engineer from the upstream, an engineer from the Corps of Engineers, and between the Diversion Authority and the DNR. There was also a policy group that was formed that met 4 times for about 3 or 4 hour meetings that the Mayor of Fargo and the Mayor of Moorhead, Mayor Williams, served on, along with the 3 other legal entities as well, kind of handling the stuff that the technical group couldn't handle because they're more policy level items, direction. And I think at the end of those meetings, they had their final meetings, I think 2 weeks ago now, or the end of last week. And the goal was, the last meeting, they said, okay, I think we have what we need to submit a new permit. But just to roll back a little bit, the governor's task force is sort of a simple purpose for a complex solution, is to find a project that met law of both North Dakota and Minnesota and that maintained federal authorization. And this is sort of a busy slide, but it's really the critical slide, I think, that really talks about all the controversy with the project, is what level of the project do you design it to? There's been a lot of different numbers over the years. FEMA has a current 100-year floodplain that only goes through about 1974 worth of data. The Corps of Engineers used a wet period to design sort of the previous project. And I think the governors were smart to sort of take this head on, solve this, because I think everybody was looking at alternatives, but they weren't comparing them apples to apples because everybody was using a different, you know, set of facts. And that's, as you know, it's tough to compare things. And so Governor's Task Force took this on. I think their first meeting or second meeting took this on and approved a level of a 100-year design that we can design to 33,000 CFS. And that's really what we're designing the project to as a minimum. The reason why the minimum is important is because there's that green area there that's unused. FEMA at the Governor's Task Force said they're going to come back in at the end of the project, you know, and certify everything, make sure, you know, it's done right. But they're going to look at a new 100-year floodplain and the project's done too. And so we don't know what that's going to be. You can pick what they're designed to, but we know those green years at some point are going to become part of the data set that's used. So formation of TAG, the technical group, they, I think you guys had, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 meetings together, but, you know, a lot of work in the interim, and so they've been working really hard. These are sort of the basic parameters. I think they're sort of obvious, but it's nice to write them down and say them. Strive for balance of flood protection and impacts between the 2 states, minimize acres removed from the floodplain, minimize the impacted acres and structures, minimize impacts in Wilkin and Richland County. Knowing that it's tough to get to 0, the goal was to get below 640 acres, and we'll talk more about that later. And then, of course, to consider the economics, the costs, increases and reductions. Task Force ultimately handed 4 consensus items, recommendations back to the Diversion Authority, the 100-year flood level, to allow control of floodwaters through Fargo-Moorhead at 37 feet during a 100-year flood, to modify the western tieback south of Forest.
That was up by 2 feet, right?
Up by 2 feet. Okay. And we'll get into more detail on these.
Okay.
And add an eastern tieback in Minnesota, which is a very critical feature that for the county that we'll talk in much more detail on here. But thanks to Madam Chair for her service on the task force and to Mayor Williams. You know, I think this was a great effort from the governors that we hadn't seen on either side of the river. And I think we were all appreciative of it. We probably could have used it long before as well. But it was a good sort of wide geographic representation, sort of different professions, people that maybe haven't been following the project as closely as others. And so it was just a good group together, and I think it was a helpful process. Ultimately, Governor Dayton in the report, in his final paragraph, sort of handed the ball back to the Diversion Authority. He said the Diversion Authority now has the responsibility to take all these views and recommendations and combine them into a permittable application to the Minnesota DNR. And so that's really why we're here, is because of this statement. So the new permit application, Plan B. You know, a lot of the features are the same. You know, I think the governor's task force went through it and realized you still need a diversion channel, you still need a southern embankment and control structures, you're still gonna have to have temporary staging of waters upstream, and you're still gonna have to rely on levees through town. I think that all those items just maybe changed slightly, but the main critical components are there. And of course, that's the new map, which we can talk about in more detail, but you can see there, that diversion channel, that hasn't changed. The inlet structures down there is sort of the point when it starts to change. You can see the purple line that veers off to the southwest, that's the new swing out of the western tieback, it follows the natural high ridge. Then the
That
yellow
used to go straight south.
used to go straight south. And we'll talk about each of these in more detail, but the yellow line, you can see that is now much more wiggly than it, before it was pretty straight. And so we'll get into why those are. So here are the two slides that show the before and after floodplain. So the blue here is what the floodplain is at that 33,000 CFS that the governor's task force picked as the new floodplain. So these maps have probably changed since the last time you've seen them. You know, it's a slightly different than the previous 100-year floodplain. But you can see with the before and after on what it does. And
Big difference.
showing my daughter, these were her favorite two slides because it looked like magic. How'd you do that? Kindergartners are easier to impress than you guys are, so. But increased flow through Fargo-Moorhead, as Commissioner Campbell said, it did go up by 2 feet. You know, the original design of the project only allowed 30 feet through town. And the bar charts on the bottom really tell that story. You know, this is looking backwards, not forwards, but you can look at past floods and how often it would have operated and how long it would have operated. And of course, some of these are based on the real details of the operations plan, but these are sort of rough estimates. So at 37 feet, if you look back past the 100+ years, would have operated only 5 times for a total of 28 days. So when you upstream storage obviously has a great effect on the people that live there and the residential properties and the farm properties there, but if you think about it, on the tillable land, 28 days over 100 years, I mean, that it shows what we're actually doing. And you can see the 35, it did make a considerable difference. You know, it's half as often looking back. And so that was a considerable change. And there was some argument to go higher. You know, some wanted to keep it lower. And so you sort of found I guess the sweet spot in the middle there is the design. Of course,
I think the discussion did say that was your base point, but in a catastrophic event, you could have the capability if you had to go higher. And granted, you didn't, you know, nobody really wants to do that, but you obviously have to have that in your back pocket.
yeah, and so that's sort of the minimum 100-year protection. If you have floods bigger than 100-year, you start allowing them more through town, which, you know, you still need to be prepared for on the engineering side of things. So going forward, you know, the frequency with that hydrology is once every 20 years on average. So the eastern tieback levee, I think this is the most dramatic change to the project in a lot of ways, especially for Clay County. That yellow line used to go pretty much east-west. Now it veers, the actual crossing point on the river is now a little bit south to get Wolverton Creek on the north side, so it doesn't impact Wolverton Creek at all. It runs over then to Highway 75 and goes down on the west side of Highway 75. And so a number of things, you know, I think, Madam Chair, you had a lot of these in your final comments of the task force report, so somebody read it. That makes you feel good. But that no longer need a ring levee around Comstock, which I think is, we're going out to Comstock on Thursday night for their meeting. If anyone's interested in attending Comstock, I think both of you will be there at Comstock.
What time?
I think it's 7 o'clock. I remember off the top of my head. And so no ring levee required around Comstock. There's no grade raise on Highway 75 or a grade raise for the railroad. Also, there's a number of maps you were handed out, the blue-green map that the chair has out right now. There's a lot of orange boxes on there. Those are the organic farms. And most of those organic farms were on the east side of this new tieback embankment, so a lot of organic farms were removed. You can see the 90% number there, but it used to be 29 acres of organic farmland that was impacted down to 300. And I think some of that 300, we need to do some more analysis of. It's at the very southern edge of the staging area, and it may not be as impacted as completely, but we didn't want to overestimate. But anyway, so some major changes to Clay County. Really what this also did is it constrained the amount of impacts that go into Minnesota. You know, if you got that embankment there, it pushes that water back into North Dakota, and you'll see that on the.
Madam Chair.
Yep, Commissioner Campbell?
Do we have a count of residential structures on the Minnesota side from where the tieback levee begins to its end? How many residential structures are on the impacted side?
You know, I know there's 14 less in Minnesota than there used to be, but I'm trying to remember what the remaining was.
But that doesn't consider Comstock structures.
No, it doesn't, you're
I
right.
mean, so, I mean, that's kind of a false number,
Well-
because it would be higher, but.
Yeah, my point being is that, you know, even though Comstock is, under this plan, would not need to have a ring levy, I go back to what I said a long time ago about the Oxbow project, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander in terms of on the Minnesota side, and there was an awful lot of work done within Oxbow that was done to allow some of the external properties that may have been damaged to give them a resource or a place to move into. If you recall correctly, that was part of the goal. I think they added an additional 40 lots or something for some of the impacted people there. And it seems to me that even though Comstock's not in it, I think we need to have a little bit of dialogue about at least maybe their main street that's there, that maybe we need to be willing to work with them on that so that their infrastructure could handle some potential moves from the affected areas if somebody wanted to move into Comstock. I don't think it would need to be to the extent had Comstock need to be ring levied, but I think there needs to be some discussion about the diversion authority's willingness to help in that regard too. And I'll have a couple of comments about Georgetown in a little while, but.
Well, I think the black squares on this map are represented as the residential.
Oh yeah, they're probably on there, you're right.
So they are on there. Some of these red dots are non-residential, but I think there's at least 10 on that piece.
But I mean, that's just something that doesn't need to be decided today. I know Mayor Williams, I can talk to you a little bit more about that as we move forward, but it just seems to me that Comstock being the closest community to that area might actually see some movement by some of these residential areas. And in it, Rocky, you remember when we did the Oxbow one, that it was clearly designed to allow some of those other places to have it, and it kept them in the same school district and all those types of things. So I think
it's a good conversation to have. I know that's always been the intent. It's obviously complicated a little bit by the fact Comstock didn't want to be a part of this, and,
Right.
and we were able to
Right.
accommodate that with these changes, and so there's
I
going to be
think
some
it's
trade-off there.
Probably further complicated by the fact that these are rural properties, and I mean, I'm not sure if someone's gonna wanna take a rural property on the river and move into Comstock. I mean, that's the realities, but you can have that discussion.
Yeah, you know, so on the North Dakota side, we offered everybody a lot in Oxbow
Right.
that was impacted, and like the chair mentioned, most of them said, I don't want to live in a city, you know? But there were, I think there's 4 or 5 now that have taken it, so even though it's a small minority, it was an option for some. So apologize, I don't have the exact
Yeah,
numbers for you.
I didn't mean to get too
Certainly
deep in the
follow
weeds
up on
there,
that.
but it. Thank
So
you.
again, this is the tieback on the western side, in North Dakota, south of Horace. This now follows sort of a natural high ridge. You know, you get some questions on why these things weren't done before. You know, I think it's a logical question. It's not the most efficient storage. That area is pretty high right there. But moving this to the west obviously allows more water stored in Cass County, which ultimately means less in Minnesota, less in Richland, and less in Wilkin, which is sort of the goal of balancing that we'll get to. I think there is one more home that's impacted because of this. So moving the southern embankment north on the North Dakota side here, you can see it's sort of a somewhat wiggly line, but this is obviously a heavily studied line, but it does require a lot more study to do a lot of the micro siting, and could kind of explain why it takes the turns it does if needed. But this really allows a lot of additional water to be stored on the North Dakota side of things, which again reduces it in Minnesota and reduces it in Richland and Wilkin County.
Bob, I don't have my task force information in front of me. This line is a culmination of A, B, C, or what is, I mean, I don't, do you know what I'm talking about,
Yep.
those different options?
Sure do.
What combination is this?
This is 7A.
Okay.
And so it's 7A on the North Dakota side, and the Minnesota side took a different route than the task force.
And the reason I ask is I think that DNR gave some pretty good, I don't know, facial gestures as to if that's the best way to say it, of what was something that couldn't have been permitted, and I can't remember, was 7A one of the lukewarm options, or,
I would characterize it as 7A by itself was probably not real favorable,
okay,
but the combination of 7A with the change in.
on the alignment,
Yeah,
okay,
really made a big difference.
okay.
Which is 10D.
Yeah, the Minnesota, that part becomes
Can you tell how many we did through?
That's why we call it Plan B now, because they came forward with 7A, 10D as the alignment, and I'm like, that's gonna be really confusing for everybody. But-
Unless you knew the process.
You know, but with this alignment change and with the 37 feet through town, the total staging area goes down by about 7,000 acres, which is a pretty big impact. Removes 5 of the 11 cemeteries. There's a chance we can remove 1 more with some micrositing. So, you know, I mean, we're not totally out of the weeds on impacts, but I think it's moving in the right direction. There are about 20 additional homes in rural Cass County there that have to be taken out now that weren't before, that were protected before, and there's a meeting tonight in Stanley Township, if anybody's interested in going. That's gonna be one of those tougher meetings, because I've talked to a lot of those people and had to tell them that, you know, they're likely on the buyout list now. And those are obviously tough conversations to have. There's a lot of residences along County Road 16 there that are just, you know, large residences, but there's a couple of rural farmsteads in there as well, that farmsteads provide a unique challenge for a relocation type thing. And so we have our work cut out for us there, but I think this was part of the compromise to get the impacts out of the other jurisdictions. So what does that do? Here's a bunch of pie charts. On the left is sort of the pre-task force project, and the right is sort of Plan B. The top row is what's protected by acres in Minnesota and North Dakota. The bottom is what's impacted in the upstream staging area in both. And you can see before, you know, the protected area hasn't really changed. You're still protecting the same thing you were trying to protect before. The staging area, though, it changes pretty dramatically. Before, about 58% of the staging area was in North Dakota. Afterwards, 81% of the staging area is in North Dakota. And so, you know, you can see the balance on the right side, the protected area split and the staging area splits the same. And so if one of the goals was trying to find balance, that's pretty balanced. You know, there's another stat that probably could use another slide, but how many pie charts do you want to see? Is the newly impacted acres. That was a stat that we didn't really utilize fully before in the analysis, but the DNR clearly latched onto that in their permit denial and through the task force work. That was about 60% of the newly impacted acres were in Minnesota previously. And now it's flopped, about 60% are in North Dakota. And so that was a big change. And I think overall, another number I know Governor Dayton used a lot in the media was, if you look at the left side, how many acres are impacted in Minnesota, the 14,800 versus only 11,000 protected. That seemed like a bad deal for Minnesota. If you just look at those numbers, you know, you're impacting more than you're protecting. And you can see on the right side, you're protecting almost, I'm gonna use rough math, but it's not quite twice as much, but you're protecting a lot more than you're impacting in Minnesota. And so those are, you know, obviously bullet points, but those seem to be the bullet points that made the media that we worked on flipping. So just to explain some of the maps in front of you, all these maps are available to the public as well, and I thought they'd be good sort of outreach tools for you if you're talking to constituents. This blue-green map has an awful lot of information on there, so just spend a minute on it. It's the only map that I've shown that really shows the before and after effects of the project in the staging area. The black hashed lines are what used to be impacted versus where the blue is what's impacted now. You got two different colors of blue on there. The dark blue is what floods currently under that 33,000 100-year flood, and the sort of lighter blue is the additional flooding. So you can see there's still a lot of new temporary upstream storage in order to save Fargo-Moorhead area, but you can see what houses are impacted versus not. You can see the cemeteries that are no longer impacted. You can see the organic farms that are no longer impacted. And so it's a lot of information, but it's really the only way to see sort of the changes to the project. A couple other maps that, you know, the blue maps are always good, but it looks like a pool of water, like a reservoir. And we get that comment a lot. So these next two, I think, help describe that more. This is the duration of flooding during a 100-year flood. Mayor Mahoney joked that it was the Texas-sized staging area down to the Florida-sized staging area. I don't know if that joke works, but at least the shapes are kind of right. And you can see a lot of that orange and, yeah. I go back to my kindergartner jokes, I guess. You know, the red and orange, that's the longer flooding periods. And you can see on the left side, which is the former project, a lot of that longer duration area was in Minnesota. You can see now that's in that new area in North Dakota that really floods the longest. And just across the board, there's a lot more green. A lot of that's the 37 feet change that really reduces that duration. You know, that the green is, you know, dark green's 0 to 2 days additional flooding. The lighter green's 2 to 4 days of additional flooding. And so there's just, you know, you can less than a week for most of that area of additional flooding. And so not trying to diminish the impacts of the flood, but trying to give you a realistic view of what actually happens. Here's another very important slide. This is the depth of water. Near that, you know, dam and embankment structure, there's a pretty considerable amount of water. You know, not for a lot of days as you saw, but it is a lot of additional water. It just shows you how much of a problem we have when it floods. It moves quick. But that area clearly is no longer in Minnesota and it's been pushed over to North Dakota pretty dramatically. I think another important thing about this slide is if you look south of, you know, County Road 46 in North Dakota, and I don't remember what it is, Minnesota, but on the county line, you can see the impacts there are mostly channelized on the right side. So you can see the impacts in Richland and Wilkin County pretty much stay within the riverbanks and the tributaries. And so we need to go down there and do some more analysis, but we feel pretty confident that we're below the 640 acre sort of magic mark if we were trying to, that was our goal. And most of those acres are not on tillable land.
Do you want to clarify why that number is?
Yeah, so the 640 acres didn't just come out of good science or magic or anything. It's an ordinance in Wilkin County that says you can't impound more than 640 acres without approval from Wilkin County. And so that was sort of the goal of that, to meet that ordinance.
Thank you.
And so we obviously have to go down there, you know, and this is probably tough to say, but I know you guys have done a lot of buyouts as a county. I know Cass County's done a lot of buyouts as a county. The buyouts we still have to do along the river, you know, from a floodplain manager standpoint. If you're impacted by this small amount of additional water, maybe not the best place to be there anyways. If the county had money, they may choose to buy out these homes. And I realize that's sort of a tough thing to say, but I think you guys have made those decisions in the past, and it's probably good to say to give some realistic expectations on this. So what's next? You know, the grayed out area is sort of what's happened, what we talked about. There's a long process. The permit process isn't easy, nor should it be. There's a lot of analysis that goes into that. I think we're confident we have a permittable project, but, you know, that's not a cockiness. There's a lot we have to go through yet to get to that. We have a lot of community outreach. Just to flip a slide quick. We have a lot scheduled. I think there's like 24 scheduled over the next 2-3 weeks. If anybody's interested in attending those, I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. Talked about Comstock on Thursday. I can't remember when Holy Cross is scheduled, but I can get that information.
Yeah, if you would forward any of the Minnesota side
Yeah.
updates to us, that would be great. Can you go back one?
Yep.
My question is in your permit submittal. Obviously, we know how long a permit process takes because of it. Are you expecting an EIS process?
I don't know if you can answer that.
So there's really two aspects to that. The Corps will have to do a supplemental environmental assessment. From the state, we've had indications of they don't need to do anything at all to, yes, they do need to do something. That's probably at least a 90-day process, maybe longer. And that would be concurrently with the review of the permit application.
And then my follow-up question, that this change, does it change the project significantly for the Corps? I know there's a magic number for the Corps in terms of how much you can change before you have to go back to the discussion.
I think what they allowed us to write on this thing is that it likely meets authorization, but I think they still have to go through their, process. They removed the very likely to likely, so I guess that's where they're at.
Gray area.
Yeah, I was like, okay.
Commissioner Campbell?
Rocky, were you, or Bob, were you intending to discuss in your presentation this morning anything about the discussions that we've had about phased permitting? Or was that going to be part of your presentation coming up?
It
or would
wasn't,
you-
but we certainly can.
Could
talk
you,
about
could you
it.
talk a little bit about that? Because that's really a key component compared to the original permit. It was, from what I understand, it was destined to failure because it didn't meet all of this stuff, and there was no way we could provide all the stuff. In a sense, we never thought that we were submitting a final permit application to begin with, but if you can explain the phased.
Sure. So the normal process starts with the application. It's really a preliminary report which describes the project. It's not detailed plans and specifications. So the concept moving forward is that this application will be submitted. Admittedly, there's still more refinement that needs to happen here, and that will be made clear. The DNR is, I think, very aware of the status of all of that. The idea is to get approval of that preliminary report, which then is an indication that the project is permittable, and the DA can then go and develop the detailed plans and specifications that would be issued in permits as those phases of the project are ready for construction. So it seems relatively straightforward, but there's a lot of process in between.
So the indication would be that if that's submitted and we get the head nod, so to speak, on the preliminary plan, that's some good indications for us. And would that also include, obviously, would it include then their understanding of the need for a high hazard dam?
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay.
That's a good question, because I think part of my concern is that, the reason I asked about what that alignment in southern Cass County looks like is if it wasn't the, yes, absolutely, this is permittable from the DNR, if that phase permitting process comes through and says, this isn't a permittable alignment, are you willing to combine some of those different options that we talked about at the task force level?
So a lot of the work of the technical group was analyzing, you're seeing the final product of
Right.
many different
Right.
alignments. in
Which I
addition
appreciate,
to-
I know you worked really hard
Beyond
on
the
it.
task.
Beyond what the task force
Right.
looked at, and sort of the challenge with that entire process, task force, technical group, policy group for that matter, I think is the DNR is not going to, as part of that process, say, yes, this is it.
Right.
Even at a technical level, they're not
Right.
gonna say yes, but they'll definitely tell us that something's not going to work.
You'll get hot or cold.
Exactly.
Right. I know.
And I think the discussions from the technical group, no guarantees, but we have a pretty good level of confidence. Their understanding of the project is vastly different from what it was
Right.
previously.
A good example to this phase thing, and I look at our Oakport project when it was done. We submitted an overall plan to begin with, and by the time it was done, even though we already had the blessing of the DNR and they funded it, but there were still aspects of it deep into the 4 phases that required changes. I can recall one where they wanted to raise County 22 or Wall Street Road on the east side, and it just seemed like that was so expensive compared to when they'd already bought out all the homes and they could have built the levee, which they ultimately did do, just to the south of Wall Street. But see, that wasn't in the original one, so that's how a lot of this phase stuff, and we're not gonna see a final alignment till the thing's darn near done.
That's also a fair statement.
Okay. No. But I mean, we're gonna be talking much closer than,
Right, and, the term micrositing shows up there. I mean, these alignments, task force and subsequent to that, are pretty roughly drawn. There's some things here that are obvious that will change. Some of the square corners are not gonna be square corners.
Right.
I think if you look in the Comstock area, being just west of Highway 75, there's is it a Senex Co-op
Co-op,
there. that-
CW Co-op.
I mean, obviously, you can go around that, you don't need to go
Right.
through that. So there's a lot of finer details that will go into developing that final line.
Thank you.
And of course, on the technical side, the micrositing, and on the financial, we know it's gonna cost more, and we know the project's just gone up in cost over time, and so we need a new cost estimate, and we need to have some more financial and funding. And we've had those conversations, I think, with both, state legislators in Minnesota and with North Dakota, and especially with Governor Burgum in North Dakota, who was pretty critical to this, and so they understand that we're probably gonna be asking for some money, and so we need to figure out what that ask is and what's appropriate. But you gotta figure out what the project is first before you know how much it's gonna cost. Otherwise, we have these meetings, talked with both the chair and Commissioner Campbell about the Township Association meetings. We'll try to work that out for next Monday. And then Buffalo Red, I think, is 2 weeks from yesterday. 26th. And we'll be there, and I forget when the Holy Cross meeting is, but I'll send that around.
I concur with our board chair, if you could supply us with all the Minnesota meetings, especially to each of us. Those are all open meetings, and
Yep.
every one of us would have the ability to go to those if we can, so.
Well, offhand, Wilkin is the 20th. We've shifted that. That's why I'm here, because it was gonna be today. And we had some changes, and they liked the idea of moving it to next week. That's at
And they meet
8:30.
the same
You guys
time we
then,
meet.
too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would have been nice to be able to, a couple of us be able to go there, but
Mhm.
we meet at the same time, so.
Anything else?
Otherwise, that's the end of our presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Okay,
That's
but
all right.
before you shut down your deal, can you go back to your daughter's, I think you said it was your daughter's favorite slide,
Sure.
please? I want to ask you a couple questions there. And this is a concern that I've had for quite some time, and if you look up to the north up there where the channel dumps in, that's up in the Georgetown area.
Yep.
And, when we're talking about, the need to have good permanent flood protection for our region, we have a significant community that's up on our northern border of Clay County, being Georgetown. And they've been working really hard with the watershed district to get permanent flood protection up there. Unfortunately, they can't get certified, and they can't get certified because of Highway 75. Maybe it was a little over a year ago, I think, Commissioner Gross, were you with me on that meeting when we invited the mayor, but we ended up getting one of the council members there. And I think there's considerable interest in Georgetown being able to get their project certified as well. And I remember talking to Governor Dayton about this when we had a meeting in the Moore Council chambers that one day. Because in the meeting that I talked about with the council member from Georgetown, we also had invited MnDOT to come to that meeting. And MnDOT certainly felt open to the ability to do a road raise type of deal that would help to do that. And quite frankly, I'm a little concerned. I'm a little concerned about where this channel goes and meeting in these major floods when we also meet with the Buffalo River. That's a mess up there. And I really think that we need to look closely at what we could do with Georgetown and to help them in this process too. That's where our channel's dumping back in. If we recall, and if you listen to the people along County 17 in the northern part of Cass County, they said that the Cheyenne diversion dumped into that area there. And they said, boy, when that happened, it really created some mess. And I really think that we need to take a close look at potentially incorporating the numbers we're talking about. Brian, you were there. The numbers we're talking about in terms of dollars are insignificant compared to a $2.4 billion project. But if we can protect another city and get them certified, it's, to me, it would be well worth our while to invest in and to look at. So I don't know where that ball.
Do you remember how much, is it $1 million, $2 million?
Well, I think we were talking about, the numbers were somewhere between 1.5 million or something.
Yeah, I thought-
Dave was
I think
Dave
2
was there
million,
too, I
somewhere in
think.
that
Weren't you
area.
there, Dave, at that? So it's not a large, they really have their levels on their levy system are okay. It's just that they can't close it off.
Because of the road.
Because of the road. So it really just becomes a road rate issue, and then they'd be good. And I would feel much more comfortable knowing that we had that safety net for them. They're a community of Clay County, and they deserve some attention too. So I would, Bob, maybe, on your design stuff, if you guys can look at that and start to research that, and I'll gladly bring it up at the appropriate time with our diversion authority, that we should be looking at that. But I think it would go a long way. I think, quite frankly, I think the state of Minnesota would like it. The DNR invested a lot of money in the Georgetown ring levy, and it's still not certified. So,
Any other comments?
sorry.
Thanks for all your work, Bob, and the technical group, and Mayor Williams and Mahoney for what you've done with the policy group. It's been a lot of work, and appreciate everything you guys have done. And hopefully, you've gotten us to the point where this will be acceptable to Minnesota and the DNR, so I guess time will tell, but I think everybody's pretty optimistic, and rightfully so, because of your work, so thanks.
I think we're at the point that if they weren't thinking that, they would have said something.
Yeah,
Which
let's
is-
hope so.
Which is, doesn't feel comfortable, but it feels good in that regard, because there's much better communication than there was before. And that's a key difference between
Good.
the project before and the project now.
Anything else?
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Very much. I'll follow up with an email on
Yeah,
the
great.
meeting schedule.
Commissioner Gross has to attend a funeral later. Commissioner, would you like to do your committee updates?
Okay, I can do that.
Sorry about that.
The two meetings I went to was the Correctional Facility Behavioral Subcommittee, where we talked about how we're coming along in different proceedings, what kind of hiring we're going to do, the phase in, we're looking at hiring so many, training them. So we discussed that, and we also looked at church ministry being involved, also the funds we're receiving from West Central, I think, so probably Jenny will have more to bring on that, but we talked about the practitioners. They want to hire a practitioner. I think they were talking about a half-time, they're looking at a full-time now, so,
That we secured grant funding for.
yes, that you got, like I said, you probably got more information on that, or better information on that, but, and, I was just looking at, I guess my concern at the meeting was also that if they're looking at hiring so many people, are they gonna be able to hire that many people? I mean, we got trouble getting people on now, and if we're gonna hire 10 more, or whatever the number may be. I thought I was concerned of getting that many hired. And also, I attended the meeting yesterday, down in Fergus Falls, the West Central Initiative meeting. Gordy Wagner was appointed the new chairperson there. And I was very interested, Dan Scogan, he works for the Agricultural Utilization and Research Institute, of all the projects that they have instituted, down in Laverne, Minnesota. I mean, there's going to be an 8-acre shrimp farm going in there. They're going to raise shrimp in Minnesota. I mean, probably doesn't seem possible, but they're talking about 8-acre shrimp farm that they're being.
Rampant.
So, I mean, that's a big process there going on. It's going to be a big building going in there. The ceiling for, are you going to be okay? Okay? We didn't have that much fun at the meeting. Okay. Soybeans are being used now for road sealing. And guess Dave Lesto, well, Eric's here too, you know, they're looking at that being a better sealant than what they're presently using, and that's gonna last 70 years longer. That's being processed now in Minnesota. It was just interesting in all of the projects that the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute that West Central's working with, what they're doing and stuff like that. So those are the two meetings I had, so thank you for letting me get
Yep.
that in.
All right, Janelle, thank you for being patient. We'll get into your annual department update. Good morning, Janelle Cheney from Juvenile Probation.
Good morning. I have a handout that you guys can refer to, and I think I will just pretty much cover updates if possible. What I handed out kind of outlines changes throughout last year, 2017, but we have had some changes to our current staff. We had one resignation that led to Mr. Mike Schomer taking over our drug court and veterans court position. And then we hired a new juvenile agent, Kirsty Knold. She started in September. And so those are the staffing changes. Other than that, our staffing remained consistent other than our reentry program, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but we did discontinue the reentry program, and there were 2 staff associated with that. In item number 2, discussion of caseloads, we did see an increase in our caseloads that we see not only coming from our local courts, but also from interstate and intrastate transfers that we see, whether it's juvenile or adults coming to Clay County, or they've committed an offense in another community and transfer supervision here. So juvenile cases went up approximately 24 from 2016 to 2017. Our adult gross misdemeanor cases went up by 50 from 2016 to 2017. So that kind of covers caseloads. Just to highlight, we do have 3 specialty courts in Clay County. Mr. Mike Schomer, as I stated before, works with the drug court and the veterans court. Drug court has been consistent for several years, has shown to be very effective. They're both, all of the specialty courts are considered to be enhanced supervision. Our agents meet with them more frequently. The participants appear in court more frequently and have higher accountability based on that. Veterans Court started in 2015, and that currently has 6 active participants. That too is showing to be very promising and supportive for people to be successful, to remain in the community. We also have a domestic violence specialty court. We don't have a specific agent assigned to that specialty court. They have many participants. Our last count for those on supervised probation is at 55, and so there's a blend of felony agents as well as the gross misdemeanor and misdemeanor agents that supervise those. Specifically, 36 of the 55 are supervised within our county contract office under Rick Young and Shelley Ford. And then also, I just wanted to highlight Rick Young is a part of the Community Services Domestic Violence Task Force. We've been meeting quite frequently to discuss how we approach domestic violence in our communities statewide, looking at risk assessment tools. What do we do for victims? How do we heighten public safety for victims? Some of that ongoing stuff, we see some of these individuals leave the community, and when they reintegrate within the community, are we really doing our best at meeting the needs of victims and keeping them informed of services and support within the community for them as well. Community work service program remains the same. Those that go to court have the ability to come to our office and have that arranged for them. If they aren't on our sentence to serve crew or the juvenile work crew, then we can work with them to find an individual site. Some of that happens because of limitations, whether it's a disability, handicap. Sometimes it's just best suited to find an individual site. We continue to do the juvenile offender restitution program. We did work with 15 different cases last year and paid out approximately $4,000 to victims. That is unique within Clay County. Each county makes decisions how they spend those funds. And as I've stated in the past, I think this is very beneficial. Most often we see victims not recover financial reparations because juveniles have limited ability to pay those back. And so I really appreciate that Clay County has made a decision to use some of those funds to pay that back to the victims. The kids complete community work service, and that's converted into dollars and paid back out to the victim. And then, as I stated before, our reentry program, we didn't incur one of the grants that we had previously. We tried to access some other grant funds. The county board did approve some funds to sustain us for a little bit. We looked to make some changes within the program, and that just didn't come to fruition, and so that program ended in November of 2017. So we'll probably revisit something similar to that. We do feel that that was a very beneficial, productive program. I think with all the changes coming with the Juvenile Detention Center and their expansion, I do see this as a vital component of that down the road. We definitely need reentry services, looking at a transition home, those kind of things would be very beneficial when looking at the youth that we have in out-of-home placements and trying to reintegrate them within their families and this community. Something new for 2018 as we move forward, we were contacted by the MAD organization. We have not had a victim impact panel within our community. We've referred to Cass County for that. And we were contacted by MAD, and they would like to get something going in this region, and so that will happen quarterly to begin with. We'll look at what those numbers look like, how many people are attending, and see if we need to do it more frequently. One of the benefits of that is that there is a $50 fee assessed to the client for attending, and that would stay within Minnesota. But people will continue to have a choice whether they attend in Cass County or here in Clay County. Overall, in closing, as caseloads increase, we are looking to see what we can do differently to manage workloads. One of the things that the Department of Corrections is implementing or bringing about is called core correctional practices. Bringing together everything that we currently do that's evidence-based practices, how it relates to each other and how we can build upon that. When meeting with our clients, making it purposeful so that we have the outcomes that we're looking for, reducing recidivism. When agents meet with clients, what happens in those meetings specifically? Some of the things that I make reference to are thinking reports where you really kind of delve into what was going on prior to some of the behaviors that led to further contact with law enforcement or being in violation, those kind of things. They have carry guides that assist with some of that communicating and focusing on a target behavior of change for our clients that will help them be successful in the community. I do list our objectives. Basically, it's continuing to work within the community with the local resources, trying to reduce our out-of-home placements as well as adult incarceration, utilizing local services first and foremost exhausting those services. So you'll see that. And then on a final note, our county probation office recently moved from the juvenile detention facility. We, as of this week, I think all of our stuff has made it over to the new location in the Family Service Center building. A huge shout out, thank you to the Clay County maintenance crew. Did just a fantabulous job of moving all of our workstations and getting us up and running again and situated. County IT has been diligent about being there when able to get there and get everybody back hooked up and working. The STS crew helped out in moving some of this stuff as well. So great teamwork. I think we've landed. Now we're still just trying to get things organized again. So that's one of a pretty significant thing on our horizon. And the felony office is still trying to finalize things. We are trying to move as swiftly as possible. I believe we're in the final stages of signing a new lease. We are looking to move as quickly as possible in May, I believe. But we are, knowing that we've got to take into consideration the renovation and expansion of the juvenile center, and there has been discussion of if we need to get out sooner, what do we do then if we can't get into our next site? So, questions?
Just a comment, I know Commissioner Gross and I served on the out-of-home placement committee with you, and thanks for the involvement that you brought to that discussion. I know it's something we're continuing to have to kind of deal with and kind of figure out the best remedy for that group of kids, but thanks for your presence at that.
Yeah.
I just have one comment too, your involvement with the specialty courts, when we look at how many people you're keeping out of the jails, that's a big savings every day, for every person you can keep out of the jail.
Right. Yep.
Appreciate your involvement in that.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gina.
All right, we'll move into the next item, the update on quarterly revenues and expenditures. Brian, Lori, are you coming up for this as well?
Yes, she is.
Somebody's got to keep you in order.
What's that?
Somebody's got to keep you in order.
Oh, I think we're trying to do that.
Yeah.
And when I'm not moving.
So this is for the end of 2017, correct?
2017.
Okay.
And good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. And I will qualify this to start out with, that this is still preliminary.
Okay.
A lot of the expenses are logged on here, but we're reaching into March and just felt that it was time to do a quarterly update for you folks. But it's the enterprise fund, the second page, that needs to be balanced out, that could vary quite a bit.
Right, there's the enterprise funds, there's a PERA journal entry that we have to actually recognize some PERA possible expenditures or liabilities. And so we haven't made that journal entry, and those could be large numbers, we just don't know yet. So that should be done in the next couple of weeks, but because it goes like this, and we just don't know what those numbers are.
Is that part of that new Gadsby?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a paper entry,
Yeah.
not a cash entry.
Right.
So
So-
just so all of you.
So we have to
understand
recognize that liability, so.
Yeah.
That was just as a few years ago, right? Where
Correct.
had
We
to
just
start
started doing that last year, actually.
Yeah.
So we'll just run over these, and some of them we had discussed during the year and we talked about them. And the biggest deficit to our budget is that first line, Board of County Commissioners. Oh, yeah. Just
Joker
kidding.
today, too.
Jokester this morning. Yeah, no, the second one I highlighted is court administration, and explained that during the year that they had extended some of their pay, and they had increased the number of retained attorneys they had there, and we had not, I had not. increase the budget for that. That was my error. We certainly have made that adjustment for 2018, so hopefully we'll be much more in line. The next item I highlighted was the victim witness advocacy. And remember maybe just a couple weeks ago, County Attorney Brian Melton was in and talked to you about the changing in the personnel and what had happened. They had been paying for the position out of the victim witness, and it's really a restorative justice, so the dollars are okay. It's just that they hadn't been placed right, so don't panic about that, I guess, or you can if you want, and insist that we change it, but there is a justification for that. Planning and zoning, there, you'll notice the expenses are up a little bit, but the revenues are up an awful lot. And
360%.
yeah, yep. That was some of the buffer zone money, the invasive species monies that comes in there and it gets distributed. The law enforcement, you'll see that their expenditures were up about $600,000, maybe closer to $700,000, with 116% expenditures. But if you jump over in again to the revenue side, the revenue was up over $1 million. And that was mostly due to the radio purchases. They received grants from the dispatch and from the state. So they're in certainly good shape, and that's what happens sometimes if you see the expenditures a little high. Check their revenue side to make sure they haven't received a grant or something along that line. Detention, our expenditures, juvenile detention. Steve has been before you many times this last year, and our expenditures for the non-secure have increased there during the year. Metro Council, I highlighted that because it was 112%. It's a very small amount. We only receive an estimate from them when we're in the budgeting process, and then they bill us for the actual amount, but it's within a couple $1,000s, so it's not too damaging.
Can I go back to something really quickly?
You betcha.
The probation revenues, is that, I see it's only 68% of what was budgeted. Is that because of the grant funding for
Yes.
those positions?
Yes,
Okay, all
yes.
right, thank you. Her expenditures are also down, but I just.
They're down, but they're not down as far as the grant money, and Janelle addressed that when she was here.
Right,
Remember, she
right.
thanked you for that consideration on that. So there was adjustment. They
Yep.
went a little bit longer than the grant paid for. The next item I highlighted was the greater FM EDC abatement program. We have increased that to $100,000, been that way for a couple of years now. And the abatement program was much higher than what we guesstimated for the budget process. You can look at that as a negative, as costing us, but you can also look at it as a positive, that there was more growth than what we expected in the city and the county.
In
So
2 years, that becomes.
that's exactly right.
Taxable property, yeah.
So, yeah, just so that you're aware of the
So
cost on
does,
it.
does that include the annual contribution that we give to the Greater Fargo?
Yes,
That's part of
that's
that
part of that.
618.
Right.
Yes, it is. And then the next figure that you always pay attention to is the total revenue fund down there. We spent 104, but remember, that was with the additional new radios and things. And so there was an additional expenditures of about $1 million, but you'll notice on the revenue side, there was an additional revenue of about $2 million to cover that. So we feel quite comfortable in saying that your expenditures and your revenues are in good shape.
Part of those revenues for the radios, we actually made the expenditures in the previous year.
That's
And-
right. So
and-
those revenues
And so
coming
we
in.
don't get that.
Good point.
If we don't get the revenue within 60 days, we can't recognize it, and so some of those revenues actually belong in the previous year, technically.
Do we have any questions on this page before we move to the next? All right.
Okay, and the second page, road and bridge is the first one, and then we somewhat get into the enterprising funds, but the first two items, road and bridge was in good shape for the year. Social services, and I highlighted that across the way there too, even though they're at 105 expense, their revenue was 105%, and that is really good to see. At this early stage, it doesn't look like we'll be able to have to utilize any of the reserves for 2017. for social services. That's the way it looks right now.
Okay.
So we'll see when it's all balanced out, and that is very good news. So the others all seem to fall in line. They're fed by some of the other lines like public health and solid waste, you know how that works and things too. So that's kind of your update. We certainly entertain any questions that you may have on your finances.
Any questions? No, thank you.
Okay,
very much.
thank you.
All right, you have the next one as well, Brian.
Yeah. The next item.
You want me here for this one?
Sure. Absolutely. We felt it was kind of time to update you on the building projects and kind of let you know what we know about the expenditures and where the revenues fall in line on this project as well. And you have to still remember, this project is spending, you know, quite a bit of money yet. We're still in the middle of the building project, so there may be something that's not included or that we can't answer right now, but please ask and we'll try to run it down for you. Not too many changes. I guess you can follow certainly what the expenditures, what we've expended to date. Well, let's start up on the top where the revenue is. That hasn't changed. Maybe a little bit of local funds or the interest changes just a little bit, but we've bonded twice for those two projects and the bond money is in. I think Lori said she's cut off now the local funds because what over and above our debt payment now is going into our debt fund to pay these. So we are no longer using those extra dollars to build into the project. Right. But you can see we're at about $55 million for the projects on revenue side. And as you go down the two columns, and I do try to supply you every month with the payment that we're making to the projects, and you'll see the progress on that. The jail project is the first one. We spent $19 million on the guaranteed maximum price, so we're 2/3 payment through that, which is a very pleasant place to be at this time. And then you can just follow down the line there. The retention pond to the west is complete. And you'll see it only identifies $25,000. And I did check with Nick, and I thought we were clear on that, and I think we are. We had estimated $200,000 for that retention pond, and that is part of the juvenile building because it was a mandatory one. So there are dollars within the, the juvenile project, the law enforcement project. They are part of the law enforcement project, so they're being paid for out of there. So we will make some adjustment on that. So I guess I highlighted it because I guess it's not highlighted on your page, but it is complete, and we'll have to balance that out as we progress on that. So it's in a positive way rather than a negative way. The other question that, if you want to go down and go into the other jail project, unless you have any questions on the jail project.
Can I just ask one question, Laurie? On the sales tax refund, do we have to submit that as we go, or do we wait till the project's all done and request one large refund?
We're just going to request one large lump sum at the end.
Okay, and so they allow us to, we don't run into timing issues?
I don't believe so. And
Okay.
construction engineers is keeping track of all that information,
Okay.
so.
I would just hate to see that we didn't filed timely to,
Yeah, I don't believe
Okay.
there's timing.
In fact, the preference is that we wait and it be one transaction
Yeah.
for it rather than a payment along the way.
again, my only concern is that we wouldn't
We
send
get
them
it.
something, no, you didn't send it to us in time, and then we,
Yeah, well, we haven't missed too many deadlines yet.
okay.
So.
Well, I'm not saying what we have, I just throw caution out
start
there.
out.
I throw caution out, that's all.
The next item falls under other jail projects costs. and it's the construction, or correctional transition team. We budgeted in the building project for $180,000. We have been, so far, paying them out of the jail fund, out of the regular budget, and we have not extracted the dollars on that. That's just an oversight I shouldn't say it's an oversight, just haven't done it yet. It'll be an internal transfer.
So it's still going out of our regular county budget?
It is, and for 2017, we're okay in the law enforcement arena with the jail, so, we can play with that as it goes along, however you folks want it done. So, the parking lot lighting and security, there's a little bit of mix-up there in the payment of it. We budgeted $160,000, and nothing has come out of there yet. And I'll have to check with Highway and with Mike Love and some things along those lines to square that up. But everything else is certainly in line. And then the other one I've got down under the law enforcement, I highlighted for me the architectural and engineering reimbursements. As we're getting close there, we're only up at $58,000. And that will lead into our next item that we talk about of some additional costs that have been occurring. So with that, we'll certainly answer any questions that you may have on how the funding is going there. You'll see down there, the total expectation is still around $53 million. Our total revenue is around $55 million. So we know there's unexpected things. At the end of the project, we'll find some things certainly, but we still feel very comfortable that this is not going to run over our revenues.
Commissioner Campbell?
Thank you. Under the other jail costs, the heating issue, that 586, was that the new number that we received for
Yes.
the boilers?
Yes, it is.
Boiler projects, that's the new bidded dollar amount?
The new bidded dollar amount.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. Then we have a $200,000 storm runoff under the other jail project. Was that the dollars that we had to mitigate? Is that what that is? That actually was done in South Moorhead? Is that
Madam Chair and Commissioner Campbell, that is correct.
Okay,
And that was $122,000 as
Okay.
identified.
So, but we have 200 here, so that
That's
needs to be
correct.
adjusted as well then.
Unless
Yeah.
something comes up, right? I mean,
Oh, that's done, though.
That is done down there, right. Mhm. Well, yes, it can be, but, I
But we
mean, this
paid on
just
it.
shows what we budgeted and
Yeah,
what
that's
we've
true.
expended.
That's right. But
Just-
what would be nice if we had a little column that said what percent we're done, and so that, for example, that 122 would show us 100% paid for. So-
Right.
So that 77,000 will not be needed anymore.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's.
In that line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on that line, yeah. That doesn't mean that it won't work somewhere else. but-
Right.
Okay, so then going down to the FF&E, we recently had some really good bids. So was this the original estimate, or this isn't after the bid opening, is it?
No, it's not.
Okay, so that, I know we have two components. There's the stuff
Yes.
that we bid, and there's stuff that fell outside that
Right.
was IT and all that kind
Yep,
of stuff.
yep.
But even with that, this 383 should fall considerably lower, based on those bids we got.
Yeah, I don't know if I dare say considerably lower.
I thought that we had talked about it being 450, and it came in closer to that 375 number. That's just and that's
No.
where I was,
Mm.
when we were opening those bids, that's what I thought, but.
Right.
Yeah, I think this was the original amount that came in.
This is the original amount, and I haven't seen the new numbers.
Well, the bids
so.
came in considerably less than the 383.
But.
Okay,
the-
that's fine. we
No.
can get squared away. And so then my last question
Yeah, I
for.
think he had a follow-up on
Oh,
that.
Yeah, a
okay, I'm
clarification
sorry.
of it. You're looking at the 383 for the law enforcement center. And
Yes.
the bids that we are open combined the
Both.
correctional
All right.
facility, yes. And so your 450 is very,
Okay.
very close
Okay.
with that. And there's room in both of theirs. But although the correctional facility is going to use up probably all of their FF&E, because they are coming
All the
before the
bids,
board for the, they got to buy 230 mattresses and
Right,
things
right.
like that. So, yeah, that's still a fluid number, but we're still, I think, in good shape on that number.
So this 1,957,000 that's showing, as our, if everything was paid out now, we'd be having that much excess revenues, right?
Correct.
Does
In the
that,
budget, yeah.
that does not include the contractor contingencies?
Yes, it does include the contractor contingency.
No, because the contractor contingencies are in the
GMP.
gross price.
That's what I'm
Gross
saying.
maximum price, but if we don't use it, that would come out. But according to this, we're anticipating we would use it.
That's correct.
So in reality, that 1.9, as it's showing right now, we could see that climb
Yes,
because of unused contingencies.
We could.
we could.
Okay, just.
Yeah. Yes, that's
Well,
right.
but it's on track to do that.
Yes, it is on track to do that, and it should be.
That's where we want to be.
That's right.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
If not, okay, thank you.
I'm sticking with this, too.
Another one?
Yeah, well, it's the next item on our agenda, Madam Chair, and it is the amendments to the contract with Klein McCarthy. And, the contract that you did approve does list in the wordage that if there is something that is done outside of the scope, that there is a 6.5% fee from Klein McCarthy on those. Well, we have talked about this in our construction meeting continuously, and we have brought things to the board. It's just, I wanted to do this update to make sure that you folks are well aware that there are some additional fees that are being requested when they do some redesign outside of the scope of their original design. And the Amendment 1 was adding the law enforcement center to the correctional facility. And that came before the board. That was a discussion point whether we wanted to keep on with the same. So that was a big deal. And that came before your board, the board here. So Amendment 2 was the additional services for the redesign of the correctional facility parking lot lighting. And that was kind of a big deal because it incorporated the safety and the cameras and the conduits for those. So there was some additional dollars for that extra design that we asked them to do. Because remember, the correctional facility parking lot, I gotta stop and think, that's the northwest lot that we did, and that was not in their scope of design. That was not in Klein McCarthy's. Amendment 3, the architects and structural design changes realigning the elevator shaft. If you remember right, we had a long discussion in our committee, and we brought that to the board for discussion purposes because the building was off like 1.5 feet to line up with the elevator shaft and the tunnel and things along those lines. And that was not due to architectural error, and there was a $5,500 charge for the work that they had to do within that. Amendment 4 was the design and construction administration services for the heating plant revision. We went through an awful lot of revision study on that, and that was not in their original scope to do, so that's the additional charge for there. Amendment 5, design included a sanitary sewer plumbing booster pump to accommodate a temporary laundry service. We were the ones that requested that, and we had to work through that in order to make that happen, and we are accommodating that now. The law enforcement storm sewer redesign, if you remember right, when they came to the underground trenching, the main water main, I think it was directly in line with that, and they had to go up and over that. And 7 was providing professional services for the furniture package. We've been talking about that for some time too, and they really helped us out a great deal on that. They put a lot of work into that, and they have to charge us for that because that was outside of their scope. So unless you have questions, like I said, these have been on a continuous construction discussion basis. But I just felt it'd be appropriate to make sure and identify every one of those costs to you and ask for your approval of those amendments formally.
Yeah, you know, these are unexpected things that did transpire, and I think they did fall outside the contract, and I agree that they need to be adjusted. I do want to talk about amendment number 6.
Okay?
On that piping, but I thought that was actually done, most of that design work was done locally by the engineering firm locally.
Mike Love,
Mike Love.
Houston
Yeah,
Engineering.
Houston Engineering. So what would,
Yeah.
why would we have a $2,500 from Klein McCarthy for that?
Because they.
Do they have to
Now,
review it, or what?
That is bringing the water from the runoff from the law enforcement center block. That wasn't the parking lot. Houston Engineering's worked on the infrastructure all around the campus, and this was a specific drain issue where they.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is
To
where they
get-
had to come up and over
That's
inside the
exactly
building?
right.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
That's why it was a Klein McCarthy issue.
Okay, that's, okay.
Would help clarify that.
So roughly about 106,000.
It is, yeah, yeah. So now, you know, I'm hoping that their figure is close to containing that, and that's where we may have to use, some of you talked about that 77,000.
Yeah.
So there might be little things that we have to, and that's not a little thing, but, you know, it'll work itself out.
On a
So,
$55 million project, it's easy to see where something like this could.
yes, yeah.
I'd move approval of the amendments to the contract with Klein McCarthy.
We have a motion to approve amendments 2
Second.
through 7 and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, now we'll move into our number 8 item, Highway Department, Dave and Eric. Thanks for being patient. 15. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you.
We've
Maybe
got
start?
2 items on our list this morning. First item is approval of the sign quotes for year 2 of our street and avenue sign replacement project. Last year went real well. We pretty much looked at doing the same amount of work this year as we did last year. We did get one different supplier in our quote mixture, as you can see, Newman Signs out of Jamestown, North Dakota. We did some phone calls yesterday, just verifying that they do know the specs that we want and require. Newman Signs has been chosen as the supplier for all MnDOT signs underneath like a state contract.
Okay.
So they are familiar with the signs we're looking at doing there. Our estimated budget that we put in for 2018 was around $20,000, so it was kind of good news yesterday to open these quotes up, and
Right.
we would recommend going with Newman Signs for their signs for the 2018 project.
So Newman Signs was the low bidder on that, and about 2,500 under what you budgeted, so what's the board's wishes?
I would move approval of Newman Signs.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Dave, do you have a particular part of the county that's going to be worked on this year? Each year you do it?
Yep, last year we did the southern part of the county, this year doing the middle, and then next year would be the north part.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, your agenda item number 2.
Yeah, we've got a resolution and an agency agreement from MnDOT, and this would be for the federal funds that we plan on using in Glendenshire. There's a 5-foot trail on the west side and a 10-foot path on the east side. There's $375,000 that was awarded to Clay County and City of Glendon as a part of a TAP grant. It was scheduled and programmed for Clay County in FY19. If we do the project a year early, there's some paperwork that needs to be completed. It's almost standard this day and age. A lot of different agencies are working in and out of the current funding year. We just need to sign the agreement and a resolution. There's 3 copies of each, basically stating that the county will burden the responsibilities, the financial responsibilities, until we get our grant. So, and it's not a lot of dollars. I mean, the total project is well in the millions, so we should be able to handle the cash flow on it. And I think the cash flow could come as early as July 1st, which is FY19 for MnDOT. It's their fiscal year starts in July.
All right. So, we have resolution 2018-15. Are there any further comments or questions on this agenda item?
I move approval of resolution 2018-15.
We have a motion to approve
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll move into our next item. The request to fill detox LPN and technical position. Good morning.
Good morning.
So you have two different requests, correct?
Well, actually, this has changed since we submitted the agenda item.
Okay.
So we will be requesting to fill just a full-time position.
Okay. Full-time technician. Is that the- Thank you.
So we have an open technician position, and you can see by the salary calculation worksheet. So we're really requesting to fill that position, but we are requesting to fill it with an LPN if possible. We're still short LPNs. We have the funding to support that. As you recall from previous requests, once we have our clinically managed withdrawal license in 2019, we must have a nurse on every shift. It will be a requirement. So because we're down LPN positions, we don't have a nurse on every shift right now. So this would be a great time to fill that with a LPN if we can recruit one. As you can see, the technician that has left, the current rate of salary is pretty close to a step one of an LPN position. So it's the hourly is $20.26 that we have budgeted. And if we are able to recruit an LPN on step one, it's $20.32. So it's a matter of a few cents. So, and we do have a lot of funding that we've received through our contracts with our North Dakota entities and also all of the Minnesota counties.
So just to clarify for me, so you had a full-time technician leave. You're hoping to fill that with a full-time LPN?
Correct.
And you're not asking for the additional tech hours?
Correct.
Okay, does the board?
Yes. And could I add one more thing?
Yeah.
If we can't recruit an LPN, we certainly would fill that with a technician because we do need the workers.
Okay.
So we have an LPN position currently open. It's been open since December, full-time nights. We haven't been able to fill that LPN position, so that is still open. So I'll see what we can get.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? Good luck. I know
Thank you.
need staff, and it's kind of hard to fill, so good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Or we need to vote on that. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move into our committee reports. Commissioner Campbell?
Thank you. Last Tuesday, we had both a Personnel Issues Committee meeting and a Highway Tracking Committee meeting. The Personnel Issues Committee was for basically entirely discussing the needs of new employment in our correctional facility, and we continue to work through that process in determining what is the best staffing plan for that. And I think we've come to some conclusions. I know there was some number of talks about 5 additional sergeants was requested, and we've taken a position of maybe starting at 4. But that still is not finalized. I know there was gonna be some more discussion on it, so. And then the Highway Tracking Committee meeting met. We went over the 5-year plan. I think we're pretty well set to go on that. We talked about the Sabin project, on a memorandum of understanding there. We talked about in our 5-year plan in the Comstock area, we have the portion of the county road that goes from the river to Highway 75 that we feel will need to be funded as part of the diversion project. And then we have a piece that goes within the city limits of Comstock. And again, there as I mentioned earlier today, that we should be considering that as a diversion expenditure. We'll see how that goes. And then there was the remaining 5 miles that goes east of Comstock that's in the 5-year plan that is not related to the diversion project. And then we talked more about the Holly CASA 33 reconstruction project, and there's a meeting set up with them on April 10th to go over those final plans. And that was it on those. Then we did have, last Wednesday, we did have a special meeting of the Diversion Authority in closed session, and that was dealing with legal issues and ultimately some of the things that were discussed here this morning. And then yesterday, Commissioner Wayland and I, along with Brian, met with police chief and the sheriff and members of their staffs, looking at a plan moving forward for the not only what will be the ribbon cutting process for the facilities, but also getting lined up tours that will go on during. We're kind of looking at a 2 or 3 day period where it'll be a big open house type of deal. And then there's going to be opportunities for groups the week prior to that, hopefully, that we'll have scheduled tours available, and that's going to be, Brian will be kind of helping coordinate that. That's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Haney?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On Wednesday, I attended the Northwest Regional Emergency Communications Board and Advisory Committee in Thief River Falls. And we had the board meeting followed by an AT&T sponsored network trade show, or they called it the road show, and they talked about linking all the communications in the state of Minnesota and the great challenges that they have in overcoming those issues. And the conjecture of some of the officers that were accompanying myself from Clay County there was that was 3 or 4 years off, that it was going to be in the future. Then on Wednesday later, I got back to town and I attended the City of Moorhead Planning Commission. And the commission approved a conditional use permit for the process regarding parking lots in the Comstock neighborhood in Moorhead. And also there was a discussion of an appeal of a previous action taken by that board in January. And then on Thursday, I attended the Clay County Soil and Water Conservation District Board meeting. And buffer issues, as usual, were discussed. Almost $30,000 in approved buffer plantings have taken place in Clay County. We approved more money for tree plantings on windbreaks. Some of the members of the board were reaching out to the Wild Rice watershed. And we approved 2 well decommissionings, and that was it.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Wayland?
I had the diversion meeting that Commissioner Campbell already mentioned, and our meeting yesterday on the tourism ribbon cutting issue. I don't know if you mentioned, Kevin, but I think we're tentatively planning July 17th at 10 in the morning for the ribbon cutting for the law enforcement center and the jail. So, and I think we're on schedule, so hopefully that will work out.
What day is that?
That's a Tuesday. Yeah, it would be a meeting morning. And let's see, I had Economic Development Corporation Executive Committee meeting last week, and we're working on replacing the president's position, and we found somebody to serve as the interim president for the next probably 3 months. Jim Garton, I think, will be done next week, so we're moving along with that. I had a yellow ribbon committee meeting, and we had just some updates from the Veteran Service Office and discussion on some upcoming fundraisers. And they did mention that the WDAY Honor Flight will now be the Veterans Honor Flight of North Dakota and Minnesota. So they're trying to expand their fundraising abilities. So, and that was it for me.
Thank you. Last week I also attended the PIC committee. That same day, I was invited to speak to the Rotary about our projects that are going on countywide. And then that afternoon, I also had a meeting with the Soil SWCD and Tony from Pheasants Forever. They were inquiring as to some of the land along Crestwood that we had purchased with bonding dollars, and we are kind of in a bind in terms of not being able to sell that, but also it being a slight maintenance headache. Pheasants Forever has dollars available to do some pollinator habitat restoration on those, and so I've asked to have a county-owned property meeting at the end of the month to discuss if that's something that we'd be interested in doing on that ground. I attended the jail behavioral health meeting just to piggyback off of what Commissioner Gross had said. There's, just to clarify, those are mental health practitioners that will be able to evaluate and prescribe to inmates that are coming in. That was just something that we have 2 hours a week. We're extending that to have it was cheaper instead of contracting that out to hire that countywide. So we're deciding what percentage we should hire that for the year, because we do have those dollars, and then whatever's unspent we'll use the following year. So you had asked about the juvenile, if we'd be using that. We do technically have them at the juvenile center right now because of the growth issues going on there. It didn't seem like the next calendar year would be the most appropriate time to use that, but eventually I think as grant funding runs out, it will be a good collaboration to split the cost between the different departments. I then attended a full day of interviews for Lakes and Prairies. They are in the process of interviewing for the senior care coordinator position. That's a position that really is an outreach to rural Clay County, and Dale Raleigh has done a phenomenal job, and so we'll see as they announce who that position will be, but there will be about a 4-week overlay, I believe, with those positions. I did have a few different meetings in regards to the diversion plan B with people from AE2S, but also residents concerned on the change of inundation. I also had several meetings regarding a planning commission decision that was unanimously approved at our planning commission. I'm not sure if Moorhead Public Service will be appealing that, but I think just to clarify, the Clay County Planning did not vote to remove any part of the aquifer overlay. It was not one that a property that had that on that. So we'll see what goes forward with that. Brian, do you want?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I attended the PIC meeting. That's already been discussed in detail. Highway tracking the same way. The behavioral health, I attended that as well, and Commissioner Mojo and Gross talked about that. But I just want to reiterate, that's turned in to be a real exciting committee. A really emphasis on rehabilitation at our new correctional facility, and it's just been a pleasure to see what's developed on that. And I know you'll hear from other counties of what they're doing in other locations, and what we have been told is it's nothing compared to what we're doing. And I know there's a work down on the Yellow Line or something like that in Blue Earth County, and it's gotten awards from AMC and all that kind of stuff. that they are just getting underway, and it's nothing to the stage that we're at. So just, I guess the word of caution there, I guess. Had a discussion with the PD, reference furniture and things on the pay, and we've kind of gone back and forth on that. And had the Public Affairs Committee at the Chamber of Commerce last Thursday morning. It was kind of interesting. Part of the presentation was a presentation from Lieutenant Governor Sanford from North Dakota, and he was talking about the oil activity. He said they've never pumped any more oil out of North Dakota than they are right now. It's just that it's being done with piping water in, piping oil out, the salt water, the fresh water, all of those kinds of things. But he said oil extraction in the state of North Dakota is alive and well, and frankly, they're seeing an uptick in the western North Dakota because oil prices, I think they're up to about $60 a barrel again. So, you know, we saw the residual effect here, and it probably won't be the drilling activity in the future, but it's certainly going to be a stable economy for a long time, he felt, out there, which is good for the Fargo-Moorhead area, in my mind. Had a meeting with Shelley Jeffers from Court Administrator and Ryan to talk about some handicapped accessibility downstairs. When the jury's in place, they have some situations where they have to take the jury member then out into the public and can't join the other jurors and things like that, but we're looking at maybe a stair lift. So we'll get some quotes on that. We'll address it to the Capital Improvement Committee and then bring it to the board. We're talking in the range of $15,000, so it's something that we feel is very doable, and it sounds like it needs to fill a void that's not there. So we'll certainly keep you appraised of what's going on in there. I had a couple meetings with the county attorney on some different matters. The aquifer issue, I met Dave Anderson, visited with me about that. He is the chair of the Moorhead Public Service, and I visited with Tim in regards to that, and that's already been reported on by your chair, where that is at. Had a meeting with Kathy McKay, and she was here about her personnel this morning and some changes there. Lori and I had a couple different lengthy discussions, referenced the budget, the revenues and expenses, and where we're at on the jail, and so we're keeping on top of that. I had some discussions with Mark Sloan and Tim Dent, a couple different meetings with them in regards to a personnel matter. They've lost one of their technicians, and they'll be coming to the board with asking to fill that, but they want to move that position from the GIS side along with some of the workload over to Tim Dent's side. They're both in agreement with that. That's going to help Tim Dent's workload, and he's been coming in and asking for additional people. This is really going to help share that workload, so that's a good move on their part. And schedule of events committee that we talked about yesterday, or the two commissioners talked about, attended that as well. That's it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Any further discussion? If not, we are adjourned.